is to see how we can leverage what is on the ground and convert this to wealth for the people.
Russia, China are gaining entry into Africa, and it would appear that some Western countries are losing out.
You're working as an expatriate worker, then you're paid in your currency. But then if you must spend those money, you need to convert those money to the local currency to spend.
For Social Security to work, we need to know exactly how many we are. We don't have a precise number. We need to know exact location of people.
When we address this exchange rate volatility, we will see definitely cost of goods and services will come down.
From a security point of view, we should employ the technology to ensure that we can track individuals and goods within the continent.
This is Early Exchange with Femi Ayodele.
You know, the Early Exchange is all about shaping policy and advancing development. With our conversation today, we're set to give you the best of programming.
And Blessing Aiche.
We do hope that you enjoy every time you spend with us here today. The world needs peace. The world needs to come to a round table and find solutions to the pockets of troubles.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Good morning, and glad to have you join us on Early Exchange, where we talk about issues related to business, finance, and the economy. Always my pleasure to be your host, and I am Femi Ayodele. I hope you're enjoying your holiday. The holiday has been extended, and I hope you're having a good time. For you to have a better time, that's why we're here to help you with the best of programming and to make your day worthwhile. And today we'll be talking about food inflation and the impact on the global economy. Don't forget, it's your program. You can be part of this conversation. What has been your experience with food prices across the nation? So wherever you are joining us, we'd like you to share your experience with us. And how you can do that is for you to go on our social media platform, on our YouTube page, using the hashtag Early Exchange. Lady B Blessing is also here to give you the best of programming. How are you today?
I'm great, Femi. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
It's good to be here, as always, to help everyone watching at this time start your day, and we thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be looking at food inflation across not just the rich nations, but across the globe. As report says that food inflation in rich nations has dropped to pre-pandemic level. Is your nation rich? You find out as the show progresses. First, let's join Ikena Yomba, who's waiting to update you on current happenings across the globe. Hello, Ikena. Good morning.
Hello, happy holiday. Welcome to the news update on SOUQ News. I am Ikena Mba. The World Bank has projected Nigeria's inflation rate to decline to 24.8% in 2024 and further to 15.1% by 2026 due to monetary policy tightening and exchange rate stabilization efforts. In its African Pulse report, the World Bank stressed the need to reform to boost growth in Nigeria, highlighting that the non-oil sector's growth hinges on structural changes. Nigeria's growth outlook for 2024 is 3.3%, rising to 3.6% in 2025-2026, with anticipated positive impacts from macroeconomy and fiscal reforms. The reports flagged Nigeria's comparatively lower growth projections in West and Central Africa as sub-Saharan Africa faces elevated food prices and currency weakness driving inflation, worsening by climatic events and geopolitical tensions. Nigeria's inflation peaked at 31.7% in February 2024, with food inflation at a 27-year high of 37.92%, driven by rising food prices, insecurity, and increased energy costs. The Central Bank of Nigeria is implementing measures, including raising the cash reserves ratio to curb inflationary pressures. Oil marketers are urging a price reduction for automotive gas oil diesel produced by the Dangote Petroleum Refinery aiming for a revised pump price between 700 naira and 850 naira per litre as they prepare to meet with refinery managers. The Independent Petroleum Marketers Association of Nigeria, IPMAN, expressed concerns over the high price of 1,225 per litre set by the refinery for locally produced diesel, emphasizing that this rate does not reflect the absence of import costs. The Petroleum Products Retail Outlets Owners Association of Nigeria echoed this sentiment, citing the substantial logistics expenses involved in transporting the product from Lagos, where the refinery is situated. Marketers noted that imported diesel is currently priced at 1,250 naira per litre due to favorable exchange rates, underscoring the need for Dangote's refinery to adjust its pricing to reflect local production advantages. Following last year's coup in Niger, Home Affairs Commissioner Eva Johansson has expressed concerns about a potential increase in irregular arrivals to the European Union as the EU aims to enhance cooperation with African nations to manage migration flows more effectively. Johansson emphasized the potential consequences of the coup, warning of a challenging situation for new migrants. While UN data indicates that over 45,500 individuals have entered the EU this year through irregular border crossings, a fraction of the 2015 peak anti-immigration sentiments across Europe have prompted the bloc to prioritize border control and asylum policy reform. In response to rising far-right influence, the EU has framed its recent migration pact as a pivotal step forward in migration management, focusing on expedited screening, asylum procedures, and streamlined returns. The United States Institute of Peace have stressed the need for the United States to enhance its commercial engagement with African countries to reduce dependency on China for critical minerals. In a report by the organization, the importance of securing a reliable supply of critical minerals to bolster U.S. economy and national security was stressed. Currently, the U.S. relies almost entirely on China for these minerals and is vulnerable to export restrictions imposed by Beijing. To compete with China's dominance in Africa's mineral sector, the report recommends more robust commercial diplomacy, particularly in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Zambia, key suppliers of cobalt and copper, respectively. Western mining companies face challenges in Africa due to infrastructure deficiencies, while Chinese firms have expanded their presence. Asian stocks traded higher on Wednesday, despite Fitch's downgrade of China's rating, which initially led to a mild sell-off in domestic markets, but was viewed by analysts as not reflecting the economic future prospects. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan rose by 0.7% following mild gains in U.S. stocks the previous session. U.S. markets closed mostly higher as investors awaited key inflation data and start of earnings season. The year on the 10-year Treasury note slightly eased to 4.3556%, while the 2-year yield remained elevated at 4.7384%, indicating expectations of higher Fed rates. Fitch's downgrade of China's outlook to negative, despite affirming its A+ rating, was seen as reflecting current cyclical conditions rather than long-term prospects. Australian shares gained 0.3%, but Japan's Nikkei slipped 0.4% amidst concerns over yen depreciation, prompting potential currency interventions by Japanese authorities in response to a strong U.S. inflation report. That's our news package on News Update at noon. Continue to stay tuned for Early Exchange. I'm Ikin Namba. Keep enjoying your holiday.
The challenge of governance is to see how we can leverage what is on the ground and convert this to wealth for the people.
Russia, China are gaining entry into Africa, and it would appear that some Western countries are losing out.
You're working as an expatriate worker, then you're paid in your currency. But then if you must spend those money, you need to convert those money to the local currency to spend.
For Social Security to work, we need to know exactly how many we are. We don't have a precise number. We need to know exact location of people.
When we address this exchange rate volatility, we will see definitely cost of goods and services will come down.
From a security point of view, we should employ the technology to ensure that we can track individuals and goods within the continent.
This is Early Exchange with Femi Ayodele.
You know, the Early Exchange is all about shaping policy and advancing development. With our conversation today, we're set to give you the best of programming.
And Blessing Aiche.
We do hope that you enjoy every time you spend with us here today. The world needs peace. The world needs to come to a round table and find solutions to the pockets of troubles.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
All right, thank you, Ikenna, for the news update, giving us the latest development across the globe. Now let's go on this short break. We'll be right back in a moment to look at global inflation and the impact on the world economy and what should be done to ensure that it doesn't snowball into another crisis. Stay with us.
Broad Street. Broad Street, situated in Lagos Island, is steeped in Nigerian history. Once the biggest financial hub of the country, it housed the headquarters of major banks, linked the CBN, the SOUQ Exchange, and the loads of lender companies. Broad Street is a historically significant street. It has played a central role in the development of Lagos and history, an important commercial and administrative center for the British colonial authorities. It was also a home to some of the city's earliest modern buildings. Broad Street was a residential area in the pre-colonial era. With the British came the Methodist Boys High School in 1878 and the Broad Street Prison in 1882, renamed Freedom Park. The General Hospital, which was a British military hospital, was built in 1893, being the first general hospital in Nigeria. The old British Secretariat building, which is now the Federal Ministry of Justice, was built in 1906. Broad Street has seen a full turn into modern commercial office blocks, complexes, skyscrapers, and markets from the outer marina through Akpombo early into the Adeniji-Adele Road. Broad Street is one of the busiest streets in Nigeria on weekdays, where commercial activities take place day and night. From modern buildings to ancient structures, this street gives one a raw dose of life in Lagos. Broad Street is often referred to as Lagos Financial District. It boasts a mix of architectural styles, reflecting its long history, colonial-era buildings, Victorian and Edwardian architectural features, alongside more modern skyscrapers and structures. Broad Street remains a vital, vibrant part of the Nigerian economy. Broad Street. SOUQ Enlightenment.
The challenge of governance is to see how we can leverage what is on the ground and convert this to wealth for the people.
Russia, China are gaining entry into Africa, and it would appear that some Western countries are losing out.
You're working as an expatriate worker, then you're paid in your currency. But then if you must spend those money, you need to convert those money to the local currency to spend.
For Social Security to work, we need to know exactly how many we are. We don't have a precise number. We need to know exact location of people.
When we address this exchange rate volatility, we will see definitely cost of goods and services will come down.
From a security point of view, we should employ the technology to ensure that we can track individuals and goods within the continent.
This is Early Exchange with Femi Ayodele.
You know, the Early Exchange is all about shaping policy and advancing development. With our conversation today, we're set to give you the best of programming.
And Blessing Aiche.
We do hope that you enjoy every time you spend with us here today. The world needs peace. The world needs to come to a round table and find solutions to the pockets of troubles.
early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
All right, let's begin our business of shaping policy and advancing development today by looking at food inflation and the impact on the global economy. This has been of concern to many analysts and many economists across the world, as even the rich nations, they are not left out of the hook. They are also battling with food inflation. According to data released by OECD, 15 nations across the industrialized nations, about 38 of them, are also battling with food inflation, which is at about 5.2%. Also, according to data released by Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria is also battling with inflation at the rate of 31.7% as of February. What will be the implication of these on the global economy and by extension the Nigeria economy? Let's shift the conversation to our guest analyst who joins us virtually. We're being joined by Olalekan Paul, who is an analyst, a researcher, and also a marine resources management, and is also an aquaculture, a researcher and expert in aquaculture. Glad to have you join us, Paul Olalekan.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be on the show today again.
Great. Now, I would like you to give us a privilege of some of the researches you've done as a researcher. Let's talk about food inflation and how it's impacting the global economy. In your own view and assessment, how did we get to this level where most nations, even the rich nations, are not even out of the hook? They are also battling with food inflation. Give us a background to these and what will you make of this development?
Thank you very much. If we need to understand this, we need to start from the basis. The inflation itself, what is inflation? If you look at inflation, according to many economics textbook or scientific definition, they will tell you it's a general rise in prices, which causes decline in purchasing power of people. And this will be likely caused by maybe increase in production, labor costs, transportation costs, climate changes, which we are facing right now. It may be due to hoarding of food. It may be to some other causes, maybe natural disaster. It may be due to war, and it may be due to pandemics, and so on and so forth. So if I want to answer your question, how do we get to this point right now? There are so many things that we can look at. First, 2019, 2020, we have the COVID pandemic that stopped everything. All the supply chains across the globe are being affected. Food or many commodities are produced in different areas of the world, and they are transported, they are moved from one location to another part of the world. And when the pandemic came, there's no movement, shipping, land transportation, and every other supply chain were being disrupted. So that's number one. After then, immediately the COVID was a bit going. We are happy we are overcoming COVID 2021, early 2022. We have the crisis in Europe, the European crisis, Ukraine, Russian war began. And we know that Russia and Ukraine, they are hub of commodity production, especially food, grain, and so on and so forth. That's another disruption in supply chain, in global trade, supply of energy, gases, petroleum, and so on and so forth. This also affected prices of commodities across the globe. Then there's battle of climate change. Production in several areas, desertification is occurring. People cannot produce the way they are supposed to produce. This also affects production, and when production declines, what will happen to prices? It goes up because supply is now higher than demand is now higher than supply, and that is Another reason is, like, for example, in our own location, Nigeria, we have the issue of insecurity in various areas where we produce food, and not just in Nigeria, in several other places where you have insurgency, bandits, and all these terrorists are affecting production of commodity food. And this crisis across the globe are some of the factors that are responsible for high inflation across several countries in the world. If you go to places like Haiti and some other Pacific nations, gangs are there that are disturbing production and the country as a whole. So these are some of the things. Some other countries, there are change of government, there are coup, especially in West Africa, where you have coup d'etat in several countries. So these are instabilities in policy, instability in the war situation is there, climate change is there, the pandemic that came. So these are some of the reasons why we are where we are today. But the good news is what the headline we have seen, that in some of the rich nations, food inflation especially is actually going down. So that's a good news.
Is dropping in some rich nations, dropping from 6.2% in January to about 5.3% now. What are the reasons, and why is it just the rich nations?
That's a very good question. Well, from the research, from the statistics that they brought out, there are two they pointed out. One is that the supply chain of commodities, food commodities, being normalized. You know, the pandemic is over. So there's, and even the crisis in Ukraine, Russia, there is this agreement that a commodity can also move out there. So there have been shipments from Ukraine to other parts of Europe and other rich nations. So supply chain has been normalized. Food commodity is being moved to where it is actually needed. That's number one. Number two is that they also mentioned that there is reduction in gas prices. No, energy is one critical commodity that a nation or community of people need to survive. So in those rich nations that the survey has been carried out, it was discovered that there was lower in energy prices. I think this is largely due to the response of the government of this nation, because when Russia is a very big player in the energy sector. So when the crisis came, they came up. There was a reduction in some taxes, what we could refer to as subsidy. There are a whole lot of subsidy here and there in the energy sector, which eventually lead to the reduction in prices of gas or energy commodity in those nations. So those are the really two factors that that were mentioned that were responsible for this lower dropping of food inflation.
Now, looking at the result being recorded by these rich nations, about 38 industrialized nations, according to a survey being done recently. Now, what do you think they are doing differently that other developing nations, especially Africa or countries like Nigeria and the rest of them, could do to also make impact and also achieve better results when it comes to tackling food inflation?
Thank you very much. Like what the factor responsible that was mentioned from the survey, one, supply chain has been normalized across those nations. They got the commodity, the resources, the food needed at when they need it. They got it through to their country. They are able to.
Oh, we just encountered a glitch there. It's coming from the end of Lalicom, but we hope that is able to resolve that quickly and we can continue the conversation. In the meantime, it's quite funny. It looks ironical that continents you would assume to be very good in agriculture have expanse land and should be primarily into agriculture and should have food security, the opposite is the case. But you have the industrialized nation having more food security than developing nations. What do you make of that, Femi?
Well, if you look at the fact that this industrialized nation, about 38 of them, according to survey done by OECD, this survey was done, and for the 15th consecutive time, these nations, they have recorded drop in inflation from 6.0 to 5.2. Now, what is playing out is production, which is very crucial when it comes to tackling the issue of food inflation. If you look at most developing nations or most third world nations, you discover that when it comes to production, they're lagging behind. And the fact that they even depend, before now, pre-now, what happens is most of the developing nations, they depend on these industrialized nations because their economies are also import-driven. And this is also where the issue of local production comes in. So these are people before now, they've engaged in local production and they have the technology, expertise, the right business environment. But compared to the developing nations, you discover that when it comes to local production, they are not there. And that's why the impact is so huge. And now why the rich nations, they are getting results, getting out of the SOUQ gradually, the developing nations are still struggling with high food inflation.
The good news is that our guest is back and we can continue the conversation with him. So looking at the continent or the developed nations and the developing nations, naturally one would assume that the developing nations would be more into agriculture and better able to have food security. But we find that the reverse is the case, as the industrialized nation have been able to achieve food security even with the pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine invasion. They have been able to recover faster than the developing nations. Could you speak to that? Please unmute your device so we can hear you clearly.
Sorry. So I think what is responsible for this is that most of these developed countries, they don't take what I will refer to as a fire brigade approach. No, they have a strategy or policy in place that have maybe a short time, medium time, and long time strategy. And they follow through to this. They stick true to their plan. Unlike for us in most developing countries, we take what I refer to as fire brigade approach. We are reactionary. We don't really plan ahead or be ahead of this issue. Most of the country, they will have known what is going to happen in 2 years, in 3 years, based on climate change, based on other crises, and they will have prepared towards that before the shock will come, they will have prepared an absorber on ground. But for us in this developing nation, most of the time the crisis will have come into our face before we begin to react to it. So that's one of the biggest issues. For example, in Nigeria, in the last let me say 5-6 years, it is clear to every one of us that where food is being produced majorly in this country, those places have been the epicenter of killing, of crisis, insecurity. And we have been living with it. We didn't really pay serious attention to it. And that is what we are facing today. We are facing food insecurity today because we can't produce as we used to produce before. Those hub of production can no longer do that. The people there have actually run away because they can't go to the farm. I go to the field a lot. I go to farm a lot. I go to villages where this thing been produced. Now, when you talk to people, they say they can't go because they are afraid of being killed. So this is what we are facing. And this is what we need to learn from developed nation. We should have a program on ground that when something is happening, we should not wait until it gets to a crisis situation before we start working towards, before we have a strategy that we can use to prevent it. You know, they always say prevention is better than cure. It's cheaper to spend money to prevent than when you want to cure. You spend so much money and it's going to cause a lot of crisis. That's why we are facing what we are facing today. That's why those developed nations, they are far, far, far more better than we in developing nations. All of them passed through this crisis during maybe towards the end of last year. UK and many countries in Europe, everybody is shouting, but today you can see that this thing is going down because they have a strategy, they have a plan, and they stick to this plan. So we need to learn from them on these angles.
All right. Let's look at the disruption that has been brought to the global economy by the invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. Now, it's a given reality that in the next few months, no one can tell where this will go. But what has this brought on global economy, and what are the opportunities that could be taken advantage of looking at this crisis? It has disrupted the global supply chain. But in every problem, you could always have opportunities. What are the opportunities here for African nations? And there are things to be imbibed as regards the ongoing development between these countries.
Yeah, just like you have said, in every situation, every difficult situation, challenges, there will always be opportunity. Like when Russia-Ukraine war started, places like Egypt, they cannot even get bread any longer because they depend solely on importation from Ukraine, and the commodity was not coming. So for me, this is an opportunity for us, especially in Africa. I don't want to go to Europe or other places right now. We in Africa, in Nigeria, we need to key into it. Like 20 years ago, I remember we were experimenting wheat production in Nigeria, and there was this, we are so skeptical if it's going to grow. But today, we know very well that wheat can grow in Nigeria. Before pre-2015, a lot of us know that we can produce rice in Nigeria, but you know, because we didn't really take it serious, nobody really cared. We still depend largely on importation of rice. But from 2015 till now, we know that we can do rice in Nigeria, process rice in Nigeria to meet the highest quality. So this is an opportunity for private sector, investors, and of course, government have a very big role to play. You know, why I actually talk about government is that they need to provide enabling environment condition for private sector to actually tap in. There are a lot of investors, there are a lot of people who has money, who want to invest in agricultural development in Nigeria, but they are afraid of the environment that is their investment is going to be secured. So for us, it's an opportunity to look at this crisis happening there. Let me give you a very specific example, fertilizer. Before now, a lot of people import fertilizer from Russia, from Ukraine, from that region. But right now, because of the crisis, it is difficult. And Nigeria is one country that produces fertilizer. And I can tell you, since that crisis started, exportation of fertilizer from Nigeria has soared, has increased, because people now know that they cannot go to that region to get fertilizer, especially countries from East Africa and other sub-region, West Africa here. They quickly turn to Nigeria to buy their fertilizer. This is an opportunity to expand our fertilizer production. We have petroleum, petrochemical products which we can use for this fertilizer and other things. So there are key opportunities in this crisis that's coming on, and we should leverage on it to now stabilize ourselves, to make ourselves a big players in this sector, something like fertilizer, something like wheat, something like rice, another commodity. Maize, corn is another big commodity that a lot of companies, if you remember, maybe early February, some big company in Nigeria, they have to write to the government that they no longer buy corn or maize in Nigeria to really support the government of food security agenda of the government. No, when I saw that, for me, it is a slap on our face. We have the land, we have the good climatic condition, arable land, we have the rainfall, everything ready, even want to do the irrigation, dry season. We have the river, we have the natural water resources available to do this. So the crisis is there, but for all there is window of opportunity to establish ourselves as big players in this commodity production. And we can support other parts of Africa.
Knowing that the
and
opportunity
other
is
developing
there,
countries.
but does Nigeria, for instance, have the capacity to take advantage of this opportunity? Nigeria currently struggles with a very high food inflation of over 31%, and it even varies from state to state. Yes, Nigeria has the arable land, but what about the capacity needed? What will enable food security? Modern farming is what is in vogue now, mechanized farming. What about all of this? How will it come to be that Nigeria first is self-sufficient before exporting to other nations?
I mentioned this earlier. You know, what we need in Nigeria now is enabling environment. This security crisis in the middle belt, in the northern part, of course, in every part of Nigeria, if this is tackled, the business of production, you know, somebody said government has no business in doing business. I agree with such person. Government doesn't need to put their hand in doing business. What government need to do for us is to provide policy and ease of doing business, enabling environment, tackling insecurity. I tell you, if insecurity is tackled in Nigeria, there are investors. All these foreign direct investment we are looking for, it will come naturally. A lot of companies, a lot of people, a lot of investment are only waiting for security situation in Nigeria to go. They will flood into Nigeria. I know companies in Nigeria that are struggling, that are trying to make ends meet because they have this money is there, but they don't really want to put it there. So in terms of capacity, Nigeria have the capacity. There are individual, there are private sector, because when you're talking about mechanized farming, it is not the smallholder farmer that will do this. This is big time player. It requires a huge investment, and nobody wants to invest where they are not sure if it's going to be secured or not. So that's what we're having. For me, my advice first, that government provide enabling environment, tackling insecurity, making sure where we need to do this production is secure, and you'll be shocked the number of investments that will come into the sector. Rice is a very good example I always make use of, because pre-2015, people don't believe we can produce rice that we can eat in Nigeria. They always call it stone rice. They give it various type of name, Abakaliki rice, this type of rice. But today, we have people who have invested in processing that we polish the rice, that we destone the rice, that we make it to that quality that can go to any part of the world. So this can be replicated in every sector. If the insecurity is no longer there, people will invest. It's a business, and people will do it to make profit, and they are going to produce massively that we are going to be self-sufficient, and also we'll be able to export to other parts of the world. Because when you are producing, you don't just target your local consumption alone, because we need to balance our trade also. And we are having this Forex issue today, or Naira weakness today, is simply because we can't balance our trade. We import more than we export. We don't do production that we sell out to earn this dollar. We only spend the little we earn through to buy things from abroad. And that's why the currency is going weaker and weaker every day. If we're able to produce, of course, be self-sufficient, and we're able to sell out of the country, then we earn this dollar, and the more we earn, the higher, the stronger our currency will become.
What will you expect of the government at this critical time when it comes to encouraging local production? What are the critical steps you would expect government to take at this time? And then what will be the impact of private organizations and individuals as regards contributing to the improvement of local production, which is very crucial to improving food inflation in Africa?
There are some critical steps that government need to take. I've mentioned insecurity severally. I don't want to go back, but it's very, very critical because there's nothing, no other thing that they do, that anybody does, if the place is not safe, it will be difficult for people to go into production. Even these small older farmers will not go there, who don't need so much money to produce. It will be difficult for them because they believe it is not safe. So it is one critical step that government need to do is to tackle insecurity. That's number one. Number two, government also should help in, of course, for people to invest. They need ease of doing business is good. You know, there are a whole lot of agencies in Nigeria today. When you want to start business, this one will ask you this paper, this registration, this documentation. There should be an alignment in the agency of the government in order not to affect investors, not to scare investors away. That's number two. Then number three, government should also fund. When I mean funding, there should be this specialized funding for agriculture that people can tap into. There was a time that the Central CBN, Central Bank of Nigeria, is doing this anchor borrowing project. It's a very good thing because it's a loan, but the rate is so is single digit, is low that people can easily tap into it, get it, and use it to produce and pay back to the government. Because today, when you want to approach a commercial bank to get loan, it's very, very, apart from being difficult, the rate is very high because the MPR from the government is almost at maybe 27.75%. So before the commercial bank, we add their own rate and something, you have almost 30-something% as interest rate. What type of business, what type of profit are you going to make to be able to pay back? So government should also help to get this funding. No, there are all this borrowing they are doing with other international financial organizations. They should structure it in such a way that it's going to be for production, agricultural production, manufacturing, and so on. So because when we produce raw commodity, it's not really enough. We should also try to transform this into value added. And that's why the value of this will increase. Even though when you want to sell to other places, you are going to earn more money than just selling raw commodities. So first, tackle insecurity. Second, alignment of government agencies, not to scare investors away. And third, help to get funding that will be cheaper in interest rate.
This, that you said, looks like a long-term plan, or at least a medium-term plan. In the immediate, what can be done? Nigeria shut its borders with some countries due to issues of smuggling and the quest for Nigerian governments to boost production in Nigeria. But at this point in time, do you think that it is time to revisit that policy and reopen some borders to allow importation of food from neighboring countries, even though the IMF contests this position?
Yeah, for me, I will not accept IMF position. In fact, from the word go, I don't support closing of border because it is culturally, we have been together for years and we have been doing, there's this cross-border trade that has been going on for ages. So it's something that we need to revisit. If any border is still being closed, because I remember, I think some times back, I learned that government has said they should open every border. But if any border is still being closed by now, I think all borders should be opened. Let this thing flow in, let it flow out, and we shouldn't close border. In fact, it is against some other WTO agreement to do this, except if there's maybe war or other thing among two countries. But apart from that, that shouldn't be it's not, for me, it's not the right policy to put in place. It's something that needs to be revisited, look at some, open this thing, allow some of this commodity to go out and to come in. I remember when this border was shut, the first time when I knew about it, a lot of commodity coming into Nigeria from other countries got wasted on the border because they were bringing into the country and they got to the border, everything, they couldn't come in, and all these things got wasted. And we are feeling the impact because we need it. Like in Nigeria today, I remember some states within Nigeria, maybe Niger State, some weeks back, make that law that no commodity should leave Niger State to other part of Nigeria. No, I just laugh. This shouldn't work because even what they produce, they can't even finish all that they produce. And what they produce, they need other things. There should be exchange of this commodity from state to state and from country to country. So for me, I will also advocate that those policies should be revisited. If any border is still closed, they should be opened.
Now let's address this issue of depletion of food reserves. According to the Minister of Agri, one of the factors responsible for the rising food inflation in Nigeria is also the depletion of food reserves. How will you assess the management of our food reserves in Nigeria, and what should be done differently this time around to ensure that when you have this kind of crisis, you can have a buffer when it comes to our food reserves?
No, it's a very simple. I don't know why we're not getting it in this part of the world. You know, as an individual, you have a saving account, and every time you keep saving, and when you need, you draw from this saving. But got to a time you are no longer saving, and you are drawing. What will happen to what you have? It will be depleted. It's very simple. Nigeria is no longer producing the way we used to produce. Sorry. We no longer produce the way we used to produce. So what they are putting in the reserve is not up to what they used to put in the reserve. And we are taking out more than what we are saving. So it will lead to depletion. And that's what I've said earlier. When we tackle insecurity, we'll be able to produce more and we'll be able to save more. It's still on policy implementation anyway. Because if you have a policy, you have a law that certain percentage of what is produced in the country should go into the reserve. And we stick to that policy year in, year out. We keep saving certain percentage of what we produce, then there won't be depletion. When we need it, we'll be able to pick up what we need and we continue to save. But if there are people who have been assigned to do that and they are not doing it, and we are not coming back that food is depleting in the reserve, then something is wrong. And this is what is common to almost every sector in Nigeria. There are people who have been assigned to do certain things, and it is not done, and now everybody is facing the repercussion. And there's nothing is done to those people in charge. There's no there's no punishment, there's nothing, nobody is held, there's no accountability, nobody is held responsible. Then it will continue. So for me, the people in charge should be held responsible. they should stick to the law. If it's 20%, 10% of what is produced annually is to be kept in the reserve, that should be stick to. If something happened, they couldn't get that, there should be explanation to the people, to the government, and we know this is why this is happening. So we won't be surprised if there are depletion, because we know the cause of the depletion, the cause of why we couldn't save what we couldn't save up to what we are supposed to save. And everybody will understand and work towards a better production. But when there's no explanation, no responsibility, no accountability, then there will be crisis.
What about the issue of price control? There have been advocacy for the institution of a price control board, which the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has said he will set up a price control board. Do you think that will in any way reduce the level of food inflation Nigeria currently experiences? Or in your assessment, would you say that the prices of the food items being sold in Nigeria are justifiable?
For me, right now, the price of the food being sold in Nigeria are justifiable. Because as a farmer myself, I know what we aquaculture sector, fish, catfish. I don't know if you eat catfish or not. I can tell you every input prices that we use in cost of production, everything that we use in producing a kg of catfish. And you go to the market, you don't expect me to sell below my cost of production. That's number one. And you don't also expect me to sell without making margin or profit, because I'm a businessman. So if my cost of production keep increasing every day, the feed we use in producing keep going up every day. And when you ask the feed producer, they will tell you they are importing their raw material to produce the feed. And that's why the cost of feed is going up. And when I buy the feed at very expensive rate, I use it to produce, and you expect me to now sell my fish below the cost of production. Is that possible? Is that business wise? No, it's not possible. So it's justifiable. For me, before price control can work, I believe it can work, but it has to work across board, not just on food or the commodity that has already been produced. What of the inputs, the resources we use in producing this commodity? Then the price should also be controlled. If that is done, then everybody will know, because it is controlled across board. They will know that, oh, this is how much they are using to produce the commodity. At the end of the day, everybody should be able to estimate how much this commodity should be sold in the market. So when you get to the market and it's being sold far beyond that, so people will know that, oh, this is not justifiable. But for now, nobody control the price of input, and now you want to control the price of the commodity. Is it justifiable? Is it fair?
All right, talking about price control, how easy is that when now Nigerians are battling with the reality of hike in electricity tariffs, which in few days will become a reality? In fact, it's playing out as we speak. You understand that that's going to affect production likely. So how easy it is to advocate for price control in the reality of hike in electricity tariffs and the price of fuel exchange rates, given the economic realities that Nigerians are battling with? So how easy when you talk about the issue of price control?
What I said right now, that for now, price control is not feasible right now, currently. And when I answered the question that what the price of commodity in the market is justifiable, this is exactly what I'm talking about. June last year, when subsidy in petroleum product was removed, especially petroleum, PMS generally, prices of everything soar up completely. Can anybody any government want to come up to say you want to control price? No. For example, in the fish sector, which I'm very, very much familiar with, I know a lot of farmers that are using petrol to pump their water, to change their fish water, fish pond, and so on and so forth. They migrated immediately to gas generator. People quickly convert their generator instead of using petroleum fuel to gas. And before you know it, within just 1 or 2 months, the price of gas also soared up. So these are the issues. So before you think of price control of the commodity, you need to think of how to control the price of the input, of the resources, of the cost of production itself. Now, electricity tariff is going up. People were saying it's only the band A. And I asked them, who are the people on band A? These are the company, factories that are manufacturers that are producing. And of course, they are in business. They are going to move this cost, the higher cost, to their product. And at the end of the day, it is you and I who are on band F or band D that is not paying so much high on the electric tariff that we still buy this commodity. So who is paying for it? So the point is that when government is thinking of price control, which is very good, I like the policy, but it has to cut across board. It is not the time to be hiking tariff. One of the factors that was responsible for the OECD countries that was surveyed that the food inflation dropped is that the lower prices of gas. So you can see that reason energy cost has gone down, and quickly it reflected on the inflation rate. So, but if we are hiking it, if we are increasing it, petroleum, no subsidy, it has gone up, gas has gone up, electricity is now going up. How do you expect price to go down? It's not possible. So if government want to control, fine. If you hike it, then the control you are going to do on the commodity too is going to be very high, of course, because you don't expect the people to produce at loss, except you are going to subsidize. And I don't think the government we have today is ready for subsidy.
Looking forward now, if Nigeria is to increase production, what crops do you think Nigeria has comparative advantage so that the production this time will be very intentional? And for some food items that Nigeria has been importing, there's substitute here that Nigeria can focus on.
Thank you. Talking about the crop we have comparative advantage, that we should be very intentional. Maize is number one that we advocate for, because maize is a staple that both man and animal feed use a lot. And that's why we're having so much problem. I think over several years, there has been even a ban on exportation of maize because of the high consumption we have over it in Nigeria. So maize, I would say, is number one that we should be very, very intentional about. Then secondly, rice is another commodity. Right now we are not self-sufficient. Forget about people saying we have been doing a lot. We are not yet. In fact, we are not there. We are not there yet. Because if we are there, the price of rice will not be where it is. But we should also be intentional about that. Government policy should be more focused on producing local rice. I think reduction on import duty of this processing equipment is a key policy government can put into place, because like you rightly said before, mechanized farming is what we are looking at. So we need, because we are not manufacturing some of these processing equipment in Nigeria, we still import them. So there should be a kind of import duty, if not completely waived, but reduction, so that people can bring in this processing equipment, because not just producing the paddy rice, raw rice is a matter, we can produce that enough, but transforming it into a commodity that will be acceptable to the public is another thing. So tariff waiver or reduction on importation of processing equipment is another good policy government can put in place to do this. Then another thing is wheat. Wheat is, we import a lot of wheat too flour and some other things that we do. So, and we have seen that it can be produced in Nigeria and already we are producing. So more effort can be put on that to be able to scale up the production in Nigeria. Those are 3 high value commodities that I know if we are very, very intentional about it, we are going to be self-sufficient, and not just we being self-sufficient, other countries around us also need it, that we also be buying from us.
Now, I would like you to react to this adversary from the United Nations Food and Agri Organization, which the organization has warned that about 26.5 million Nigerians living in Zamfara, even the FCT and also some part of the north will experience what we call severe food crisis between June and August this year. What are the peculiarities about the states, and what should be done to avoid this looming crisis in those states?
You know, what these people said, for some of us, it is not new. It's not news. It's something that is expected, because these places you talk about, if you look at it critically right now, these are epicenter of banditry, where people can no longer go to farm to produce anything. And if you remember from the beginning, I've been hammering why they have mentioned this, that they are going to experience severe food crisis. It's not only Zamfara, but of course, it's an epicenter. Some states around that, not only them, some states around that region will experience it. And not only them, Nigeria as a whole, because it's going to be across the country. Right now, I've said it earlier, why we are experiencing this high inflation, because the supply of food we have is not meeting the demand. The demand is higher than the supply. We are not producing enough for us to consume. People who used to produce, those areas where they used to produce high volume of food can no longer do that. Not because the land is no longer there, not because the resources, they don't know how to do it any longer. It's simply because the place is not it's not secure for this. It's not safe for them to go into production. So that is the issue. For us to be able to avert that, it's getting late right now because the time is close, but we can still do something around it, tackling this insecurity headlong, for people to be able to go back to farm and produce. Because right now, this is April, in most of those places, that is by May, June, that's when production planting season will begin. What we are going to face right now is the deficit of what they are unable to produce in previous years.
Thank you so much, Akonde Olalikon Paul, who's a researcher and aquaculturist, has been talking with us today on global food inflation as it affects the rich nations and also developing nations. Thank you for your time on Early Exchange today.
It's a pleasure.
Early Exchange takes a break now. We return to look at sub-Saharan Africa's growth. Is it sufficient to end poverty? Let's find out after this break.
Lateef Jakande. Born Lateef Kayode Jakande in the Ekbetedo area of Lagos Island, Lagos State, on July 1929. He studied at the Lagos Public School at Enuowa, Lagos Island, then at Bonham Memorial Methodist School, Port Harcourt, King's College, enrolled at Ilesha Grammar School, where he edited a literary paper called The Quarterly Mirror. Jakande began a career in journalism in 1949 with a daily service and joined the Nigerian Tribune in 1953. The owner, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, appointed Jakande editor-in-chief of the Tribune in 1956. Jakande established John West Publications in 1975 after leaving Tribune and began to publish the Lagos News. He served as the first president of the Newspaper Proprietors Association of Nigeria, NPAN. Jakande ran for election as executive governor of Lagos State in 1979 on the Unity Party of Nigeria platform. His administration was effective and open and implemented the cardinal policies of his party. He introduced housing and educational programs targeting the poor, building new neighborhood primary and secondary schools, and providing free primary and secondary education. He gave poor people's children education, and many of them are now very prominent in the society today. Jakande established the Lagos State University and constructed over 30,000 housing units. After the military takeover in 1983, Jakande was charged, prosecuted, and convicted of treason and later pardoned. He served as Minister of Works under the Sani Abacha military regime. He died in Lagos on February 11, 2021. Lateef Jakande was the first civilian governor of Lagos State. Lateef Kayode Jakande, SOUQ Enlightenment.
The challenge of governance is to see how we can leverage what is on the ground and convert this to wealth for the people.
Russia, China are gaining entry into Africa, and it would appear that some Western countries are losing out.
You're working as an expatriate worker, then you're paid in your currency. But then if you must spend those money, you need to convert those money to the local currency to spend.
For Social Security to work, we need to know exactly how many we are. We don't have a precise number. We need to know exact location of people.
When we address this exchange rate volatility, we will see definitely cost of goods and services will come down.
From a security point of view, we should employ the technology to ensure that we can track individuals and goods within the continent.
This is Early Exchange with Femi Ayodele.
You know, the Early Exchange is all about shaping policy and advancing development. With our conversation today, we're set to give you the best of programming.
And Blessing Aiche.
We do hope that you enjoy every time you spend with us here today. The world needs peace. The world needs to come to a round table and find solutions to the pockets of troubles.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Yes, indeed, we're still in the business of shaping policy and advancing development on Early Exchange. Earlier, we had a conversation talking about food inflation and impact on the global economy. And now let's look at the Sub-Saharan Africa, where economic growth is set to expand by 3.4% in the next 2 years. But the question is that enough to tackle poverty in that region? The World Bank took a position. But let's find out what's the position of our guest analyst, who is our in-house analyst. We have been joined by Dr. Idauza Samanze. Glad to have you join us this morning on Learning Exchange.
Femi, a pleasure to be here this morning. Blessing, good morning.
Welcome to the show.
So let's talk about the economic growth in Sub-Saharan Africa. You know, the projection is that in the next 2 years, the region is going to experience, expansion to about 3.4%. But the question is that enough to tackle poverty? The World Bank has taken a position. The World Bank feels that's not enough. What's your take? What do you feel?
Well, whether 3%, 3.4% growth rate for Africa is enough to deal with the multitude of challenges that is facing the continent, I say obviously no. It's not enough because if you have a population that is growing at a rate of about 3 to 3.3%, and of course you are growing your GDP at 3.4%, it definitely means that you cannot feed that population. So that is what it portends. But I think we must look beyond the economies of the World Bank and begin to look at Afrocentric economies. And I think that's where the real conversation here should lie. Many Africans should not see this as given. It seems to be a projection. Projection is not something that's actual, exact. How do Africa up its game to ensure that we have to catalyze a growth that should be between 6 to 9% is what we should be talking about, really. And I think that's possible for Africa if we will sit down to strategically put program in place to see African transition. You see, what I've observed is that these predictions and speculations from the Bretton Woods institutions are designed somehow to stunt the progress of Africa. And I think that we should have African economies who also will sit down and see what are things that we can do, really. Because honestly speaking, if you look at it in terms of GDP and growth, a lot of informal things that are happening in Africa are not factored into our growth and our development. Whereas because they have a much more formalized system where almost everybody is registered, everybody is captured, you can know per chance what everybody is doing. But we live in an environment here where a lot of people are storing money in their houses, both foreign currency and local currency. So you really cannot, for a certainty, say what the growth is like. And now, if you're using real estimates like we do from time to time, previous study that was done some years ago, and then of course we are just incrementally scaling up to get your figure, then also you could also be right. There's a whole lot of activities that are also happening right here, right now in Africa. You see a lot of young people who are also delving into wealth creation, wealth generation. All these things must be factored into the growth projection of Africa. And I think at the moment, a lot is happening. We saw that even the change of guard in Niger Republic has changed the trajectory of growth to be one of the world's fastest growing economy. And I think if Africans' potential are unlocked by the leaders of Africa, we can actually exceed what those projections are.
All right. In looking at trying to unlock the potentials of Africa, well, you may not agree with the World Bank's projection of 3.4%.
No, I'm saying the projection, how scientific it is a different ballgame, because there's a whole lot of activities that's happening in Africa, and how these are captured to fit into what we're actually saying is what need to be reviewed. And you really need African economists who should be on the ground actually studying Africa to report Africa, rather than having Africa report from
outside. All right. As it is right now, there are several factors that would make whatever growth that Africa is having become insufficient to end poverty. One of them, we have high energy costs. We also have a rising population and low food production. How can Africa tackle these three key things to enhance its growth, alongside other good things that are happening, alongside other meaningful development that is going on in Africa?
You see, there's something that a lot of people really need to understand about growth and development. As we speak today, Africa continent is the only continent in the world that has potential for growth. Africa. Europe has reached a climax. Asia is on its climax. So the only continent that is open for growth is Africa. And not just that we are open for growth, we also house 70% of world mineral endowments. That's the point.
Is Africa extracting them? Is Africa extracting them for its use?
Yeah, this is why I'm saying when you unlock your potentials, you will be the continent to beat, because there's so much there that is there. You see, one of the things that they call it in psychology is self-fulfilling prophecy. You see, when you begin to talk down on yourself, and this is what all these projections are meant to do for Africa, so that we undermine what potentials we can have, and we are not open to what opportunities that are there. So I'm not limited by whatever thing that World Bank is saying. That's their figure. But I'm also seeing, for example, a Nigerian president who is determined to grow a $1 trillion economy by 2027. So, and a whole lot of effort is being put in place. Take, for example, we're looking at the capital market, what is happening right now. All the banks are doing everything within their reach to ensure that they have to muzzle up to fund that $1 trillion economy. You saw recently, you see Fed Bank is doing some primary offer. You are seeing some on JTB Bank. You are seeing some on and all these things. And these are all going to be fully subscribed. And all this is telling you that there's a whole lot of activity that can happen in Africa. So we should not be limited by what a foreigner say about us. What should concern us really is how do we unlock the growth potentials in Africa and harness it to conquer poverty in the land.
Now that the World Bank has maintained that this result might not be enough to tackle poverty, what will you expect of nations in these regions to do to further reduce poverty? Poverty is everywhere. You might not actually eradicate it, but efforts can be made to reduce it. What will you expect governments of these various nations in these regions to do to ensure that poverty is being reduced?
Yeah, that is a exact conversation we should be having. What should African nations be doing at the moment, really, to see how do we unlock the potentials that are inherent in Africa. Blessing just talked about energy costs. And I don't see why Africa really, for example, should be talking about energy. If anybody should have been talking about renewable energy in terms of solar, we should be, because we are the most blessed continent with this resource. What we have done with it is something that is also a topic to be discussed in another day. We have gas in abundance here under our soil, untapped. We have body of water that is so large across Africa. And all these waters are resource that it can convert quickly into energy. So, African leaders must evolve in terms of thinking. The Napoleon Hill small book, Think and Grow Rich. The only way to get rich is to think. And it is the high time all of us put on our thinking cap and see what we can reinvent in Africa to change this narrative. And we are not looking and say, but let's see, World Bank is not good. This projection is actually for 2024, 2025. We have not even started. So it's like saying that we have tied us down one place and therefore we are not able to move between now and 2025. And I think for me that is even not, is not healthy for them to be telling us that by 2025 we cannot even do something so substantial. So I think African leaders need to prove World Bank wrong. That we can do something substantial to deal with the issue of poverty. What do we need? Very few things. Conquer poverty is deal with the issue of hunger. Agriculture, for example, is underexploited in Africa even. Globally, it's still Africa that is having about 60% of its arable land yet to be cultivated. You don't find that in Europe, you can't find that in China. And the beauty is also to say that the population of Africa is so youthful that the average population of Africa is put at 19 years. So which means you have really young, able-bodied men that can actually speed up this growth. Redirecting the mindset of the African child, of the African man, of the African woman is what is important. So how are we going to do this? Create real good enabling environment. One of the issues that a lot of people speak to is the cost of capital for Africa. Government in Africa must deliberately, as a matter of urgency, see how to walk down the cost of capital. And we must not take the recommendations of these Bretton Woods institutions that we need to continue to hike our rate in order to get macroeconomic stability, I feel it can work in Africa. Because the more rate you hike, the more poverty you unleash on your people. Because the people who are borrowing this money from you at a very high and exorbitant interest rate are going to pass this rate to the consumers who already have no disposable income to even purchase the things that you are producing. So I think African government and those who run our economy should understand this issue. That it's not about lending to people who has money. It's knowing ultimately who bear the brunt of the rate. So if you lend to an FMCG, for example, who is producing, if it is milk, if it is sugar, whatever I think they are producing, the interest rate is factored into the cost of production. And that price eventually is borne by the consumer. Mind you, these products are not for export. That you are hoping that when you produce it, you right price it and sell it to somebody abroad. You are selling it to your people who already don't have means. And so you see, in an economy where people are buying necessity, and nobody can even think about luxury, then you don't need to be playing with the rate for the people. We must look out for mechanism to see how we can lower the rate so that we can have more money in the hands of people to actually support productive activity in Africa. So once this is done, we can see African we rise, and then of course we become the bride of the world.
In making African rise, the same World Bank that's making projections also recommended some approach through which Africa can end poverty. Now, one of them is the investing in people, development in human capital. Another is ending inequality, wage inequality. First, let's begin with investing in people. What sort of investments does Africa need right now? You've talked about Africa having a very youthful population and having so much potentials for growth, including natural resources. So what kind of investment will be able to harness these two key things, a youthful population and the natural resources that Africa has?
Oh yeah, there's so much that we can do in those two regards. I agree completely with World Bank, because I was speaking somewhere on Saturday at an event organized for young African women and network, and I said to them, you see, one of the big problems that Africa is really suffering right now is one of the problem of inequality, where, of course, the women and the children are not empowered. And if you don't empower women and empower children, what you're doing is actually you are stunting your growth. And Africa needs to do a lot in that regard. We're not just going to be talking about sustainability in terms of saving planet alone. We must also be talking about sustainability in people, which is the second pillar of sustainability. Actually, come in three pillars. The first pillar is planet, the people, and then profits. Now, this area, we need to see how to work around this. So while we are talking about saving the planet, we must also be talking about saving the people. And how do you save people? You save people by educating them. The education system in most of African countries right now is nothing to write home about. And I think that's something that is desired. We have to find a way to do it. Recently, we saw a chap who went to Benin Republic to go and shop a certificate and brought home. And we've been hearing this packaging thing they talk about certificate, even from neighboring African countries, to tell you how bad the education system is in Africa. That needs to really be worked on. So how do we revamp education that it becomes really functional? The people who go to school to study a course will leave the university and they will come out with the level of intelligence or skills that can translate theory into practice. That needs to be done. Now, government can't do that alone. So they need to partner with thriving private sectors, which is, of course, the synchronization of both the town and the GAM needs to be prioritized. And that is important. Where people who are doing business in Nigeria, for example, should be able to invest in the university system such that those universities will be producing ready-made graduates for their productivity. And until that integration happens between the town and the GAM, you will find that you will continue to do your own things and somebody is doing something else. While they were teaching me Fortran 77 in the university, people were already producing microchips somewhere. You understand it? So we were doing what they call it, mainframe computer. People were already producing iPad. And so you have people who are computer scientists or computer engineers who are backward in terms of thinking because of the curriculum that is presented at the institutions of learning. So this is where we need to see how we can deal with our education system so that it can become really functional. So that when people study mechanical engineering, it will not just a paper qualification alone. They should be able to construct models. They should be able to do designs. Cars that are made for African environment. This is where our education should go. There's a trend you see, I don't know, where you have students who are studying technical courses and they are supposed to be doing internship, and the school give them paper and say they go and look for where to do internship. That cannot help. The school should have agreement with where these skills are needed, and then the students are deployed to this area. You have to be strategic. You don't just ask a student who is doing ND, for example, or is doing a BSc program and is going to do internship, where he is supposed to see the practice of what is being done, and we are asking him with paper to go and do internship, and there's no follow-up. Nobody is even seeing what the guy is doing. At least I have some interns in the house. I've never seen anybody come here to look at what they are doing. So this is a problem. So how do you grade them? That they actually went out for 1 year or 6 months or 3 months and they have done something meaningful that will aid their understanding of the course that they are studying. It's not there. So this ritual had to stop. And if we don't invest in that education system, we will not be able to come out of the challenge that we are facing, because for productivity to increase, then of course the level of learning also must correspondingly increase.
Now, still talking about tackling poverty, which is what the World Bank has laid emphasis on. You discovered the approach to tackling poverty in most African nations. You deploy the use of social intervention or empowerment programs. Yet you discover that more people are getting into poverty. What do you think is wrong with this model when it comes to social intervention and then the issue of empowerment?
Well, I don't want to delve into those areas because those are dream pie for African leaders. And it's a very weak way to think that when people are hungry and the way to solve hunger is to throw money at them. That's actually funding laziness. And that should not be done. And I think this is where we really need to speak to ourselves. But you see, because I've always emphasized this, because Peter Ike, God bless his soul, has made this point very clearly, that African leaders really do not value the state. And so when we go to the state, we don't go to the state with the intention to transforming the life of the people. We go to the state with the intention with what we are going to pull out from. I read an article some days back in Nigeria where EFCC said for just one ministry of this so-called humanitarian affairs that over 30 billion has been recovered and 50 accounts are being combed. That tells you what these social interventions are meant to do. What should be the kind of social intervention that Africans should get themselves involved in? And I think it should just be in two areas. Number one, provide first-class infrastructure for people. Let young people have access to light. Let them have access to good roads. So that if they produce something, effortlessly they can take it to the road. If they learn a trade, they can begin to work. They don't need government 10,000 or 25,000. They don't need it. So create that basic infrastructure. Give every Nigerian, for example, or every African child health insurance. Pay this money into health insurance. So that if a child is sick or a person is sick, he can have access to hospital and be treated based on the insurance the government is paying. Now, what you do here is that by the time you pay this money in bulk into the insurance company, you're creating more opportunities in the insurance, you are engaging more people, and your economy is becoming more robust. Outside of that, government should create hubs where people can do community farming, they can do community engineering, and all manners of community collaborations. Where government, for example, will invest in some SMEs to provide some businesses or investment within the various value chains of production. If it's agric, you know that in my village they plant cassava. You go and put a plant there and build it where the villagers can actually come to extract starch, which is an essential commodity globally today. And we are the highest producer of cassava globally. Imagine that it's not just fufu and eba we are doing with our cassava. And we are taking the starch, which pharmaceutical companies require. That will create huge wealth. But as it is today, all those starch component is wasting in the village. And so the villagers really don't know what it is. Because they are struggling to take gari and fufu out of the cassava. So this is where government needs intervention. So you create such factories where they can take their thing and extract their own things and make money for themselves, and then of course pay a token to use that facility. If you have such intervention across the places, people will be encouraged to do meaningful things, not dashing them 5,000, we call it conditional cash transfer, and then it stayed in the account of another man for 3 months or 4 months. After he has traded with it, then they are going to pay it. Sometimes the thing is not complete. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. All this for me are not necessary, and that's not the way to deal with poverty.
So you're talking basically about value addition.
Oh, yes.
We'll go on a quick break and return. We'll look at how to create value addition for a lot of resources that Africa has. Stay tuned.
Broad Street, situated in Lagos Island, is steeped in Nigerian history. Once the biggest financial hub of the country, it housed the headquarters of major banks, linked the CBN, the stock exchange, and the loads of lender companies. Broad Street is a historically significant street. It has played a central role in the development of Lagos and history. An important commercial and administrative center for the British colonial authorities. It was also a home to some of the city's earliest modern buildings. Broad Street was a residential area in the pre-colonial era. With the British came the Methodist Boys High School in 1878 and the Broad Street Prison in 1882, renamed Freedom Park. The General Hospital, which was a British military hospital, was built in 1893, being the first general hospital in Nigeria. The old British Secretariat building, which is now the Federal Ministry of Justice, was built in 1906. Broad Street has seen a full turn into modern commercial office blocks, complexes, skyscrapers, and markets from the Outer Marina through Akpombo, early into the Adeliji Adele Road. Broad Street is one of the busiest streets in Nigeria on weekdays, where commercial activities take place day and night. From modern buildings to ancient structures, this street gives one a raw dose of life in Lagos. Broad Street is often referred to as Lagos Financial District. It boasts a mix of architectural styles, reflecting its long history, colonial-era buildings, Victorian and Edwardian architectural features, alongside more modern skyscrapers and structures. Broad Street remains a vital, vibrant part of the Nigerian economy. Broad Street. SOUQ Enlightenment.
Idumota Market. Eko Idumota, once a residential neighborhood, is home to Idumota Market located on Lagos Island. It is one of the oldest and arguably one of the largest markets in West Africa. Idumota is a historic neighborhood adjacent to the Lagos port that facilitated the slave trade and later, under the British indirect rule, it surrounded to exports that fueled the colonial enterprise. Idumota was also the location of an armed forces remembrance cenotaph called Soja Idumota, built as a monument to Nigerian soldiers who served with the West African Frontier Force. An Eyo Masquerade statue and a clock tower are also some monuments at Idumota. Idumota Market is so popular that large sales are recorded as early as 7 a.m. The market is made up of hundreds of locked-up shops occupying several multi-story buildings, with some measuring about 5 or more floors. In 2010, the Lagos State government demolished some illegal structures in order to improve vehicular and human movement in and around the markets. During weekdays, the neighborhood of Idumota is densely populated by shoppers, traders, and bus passengers. From the Carter Bridge ascending into Lagos Island, passengers can see the neighborhood before disembarking at their final destination. Idumota Market accommodates the substantial inflow of imported goods. The bulk of import from abroad are routed first through Idumota and then on to other markets through Nigeria and other West and Central African countries. The energy of private Idumota traders and wholesalers facilitate this activity, where millions of US dollars worth of wholesale is exchanged daily. Idumota Market, SOUQ Enlightenment.
The challenge of governance is to see how we can leverage what is on the ground and convert this to wealth for the people.
Russia, China are gaining entry into Africa, and it would appear that some Western countries are losing out.
You're working as an expatriate worker, then you're paid in your currency. But then if you must spend those money, you need to convert those money to the local currency to spend.
For Social Security to work, we need to know exactly how many we are. We don't have a precise number. We need to know exact location of people.
When we address this exchange rate volatility, we will see definitely cost of goods and services will come down.
From a security point of view, we should employ the technology to ensure that we can track individuals and goods within the continent.
This is Early Exchange with Femi Ayodele.
You know, the Early Exchange is all about shaping policy and advancing development. With our conversation today, we're set to give you the best of programming.
And Blessing Aiche.
We do hope that you enjoy every time you spend with us here today. The world needs peace. The world needs to come to a round table and find solutions to the pockets of troubles.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Yes, it's the early exchange, and we're still looking at the projection by the World Bank as regards the economic growth at the sub-Saharan African region, which the projection is at 3.4% for the next 2 years. And we still have our in-house analyst with us, the Vice President of Femi Wash Media Limited, Dr. Idauza Samanse. Now, let's look at what is playing out in West Africa compared to East Africa. Now, the projection by the World Bank is that the West African nations will experience 3.4%. But for the East African, you have the Rwanda and the rest of them, the projection is they're going to experience 5.3%. What's the difference? What do you think these nations, talk about Rwanda and the rest of them, are doing differently that is prompting the World Bank to have this kind of optimism about this region compared to that of the Western African countries?
Well, I think it is just governance, as it were. But like I said, all these are projections, real-time projections. We can sit down and you're having a system that's well designed, like Rwanda is doing excellently well. Kenya is putting a whole lot on the ground. And Rwanda is ensuring that within this immediate neighbor, there's a whole lot of collaborations and trade that is going on. That's happening in East Africa. So they have a common union, which is one of the things that Mr. Wallace was talking about yesterday. And you have a champion there, and that champion is Paul Kagame, to see how to stem the tide of corruption, the tide of wars in East Africa, and ensure that the borders are open and you can move across East Africa easily within the same zone. And this, of course, definitely will spur trade. A lot of things produced in Rwanda is taken to Sudan. So the markets are open. And so this movement is happening around there. But of course, you know, in ECOWAS, there's a serious barrier. And that's the language barrier that has happened. And now worsened by the coup and the position of ECOWAS on the coup, which of course made about 3 of the member of the sub-region had to dismembered. And all of this, of course, you have to also factor in how does this facilitate trade between these neighbors. So these are some of the things that you are going to be looking at. That activities may slow down because of the instability within the West African sub-region and as against the kind of cooperative efforts that is happening around in Rwanda. Although a lot of those states also have their own peculiar issue, like Uganda, which of course is also known too well for corruption. So as this nation evolves, you find that they are putting structure in place to ensure that there's basic activity that is going on. There's nobody who gets to Rwanda today who will not be motivated. It's just like what happened in Asia Tiger. Once Singapore was able to actually spearhead the transition in that part of Asia, all the neighbors were challenged. Malaysia became challenged, Indonesia became challenged, and everybody's struggling really to see how they can equal what is happening or replicate what is happening in Singapore. And so you also see that sometimes progress can be, what language do they use now? Can spread easily, you know. It's contagious. When you are doing something well, somebody sees you are doing something well, you want to copy what you are doing. And it is in that sense that a lot of people are talking about the emergence of Nigeria in Africa that once Nigeria starts to do things right, a whole lot will change in Africa.
All right, changing things in Africa, what is the role of the institutions and how can that synergy be there between the institutions and the industry to create lots of value for many of the resources that Africa has, value addition?
You see, every time I hear these arguments about institutions, because I also hear people talk about, oh, the reason why we are not doing what we are doing is because institutions are weak. It evokes a feeling and a sense of institutions being like a human being that has no power. And that's a very, very wrong way of thinking as far as I'm concerned. Like I said, China had to build a wall to protect the enemy from coming into China. And the history tells us that for 100 years, the enemy came into China twice without scaling the wall. They gave money to the soldiers in the gate, and they walked into China and conquered China. So this is the narrative about institutions in Africa. There's a way people feel that maybe because those who run this run were paid, that's why they are corrupt. What about those who are really well paid and are still corrupt? So it's not institutions. It's a human being with values that drives institution.
I'm actually talking about the research institutions, the educational institutions that Africa has. What should be their role in providing research that will be a form of provide direction for the industries to know, oh, from this we can get this, from this we can, this is the value chain or the value addition that can be created from a certain item to boost economy, instead of making just taking one item or getting one item from a particular resource and that's it. The other is laid to waste. And then it's being sold as a primary product to other nations, which make good use of it. And then they begin to export a byproduct of it to Africa.
Listen, that is the point I'm making. Education institution, for example, is run by men without values. How can it generate research? For God's sake.
But there are funding for some research.
No, you see, this is what I'm saying to you. So if I give you money to go and fund research, you do some side chick one side, you do some new works on the other side, and then you travel to Canada, come back, or probably put your son in a better school. That's how it ends. That's how it ends. That's what I'm talking about. Human beings. That's what we need to create first. If you don't have good human beings to run institutions, the institutions will be run aground. And that's what we are experiencing. Go to NIFO and see what's happening. Go to Yanomo, Robert Research, and so many of them scattered all across the places and see what people are doing. So we need human beings first. Men of value who understand ethics and morality in leadership to drive these institutions. So you don't get to do some, just someone said, the last time we were doing recruitment here, and the lady said to us, she said, oh, I wrote my project myself. I was very proud about that, and that was fantastic. So do people write projects for people before? You say, yes, of course. There were areas where people have to travel from one university to the other, take a project done somewhere, remove the backup and do another one, and come and submit it. We are even having that lecturers are having centers to write and just pay money and then we have done these things for you. So all these things are happening within our system and then nobody's checking, nobody's monitoring. So this is where I'm talking about value system. So what Africa needs really is to create a new set of value that prioritize hard work, honesty, transparency, openness, accountability. And when this is found in us, then we can see society transformed. You know, before I came into the studio just now, I had to preach in a church, and I was saying to them, when Jesus says to us, for example, I am the vine and ye are the branches, and you are supposed to bear good fruit. We are supposed to be producing fruits of righteousness. Now, that fruit we don't see in society, even when churches are multiplying on a daily basis. We can't see the fruit. We don't see it in the marketplace. We don't see it in the workplace. We don't even see it inside the church, let alone inside the family houses. Now, if we're not producing that righteousness, how are we going to drive development and growth? Because the truth is that any nation, they don't need to be a Christian nation. Any nation that you have seen made progress so far, go and find out what works there. They don't call it righteousness. Some people will just call it simple discipline. So that when they say they are going to do road and 10,000 naira is the value of this road, nobody is going to say it is 30,000 so that it costs state more money. That's the point I'm making. So we need high values in society to drive this change.
As a wrap-up, where will these people that will drive high value in society, where would it be sourced from?
You have to start with SOUQ News.
Okay.
Stand for what is right.
Which we are.
Preach what is right. And don't be carried away by the sentiments in that society. Because media has a critical role to play in conscientizing society. That will try as much as possible to be balanced and objective in reporting issues. And once we can drive this narrative and it gets to a critical mass of people who understand that, look, it's not just about persons, it's about our collective. And we all have one role or the other we play in the decadence that we all are experiencing. That those who are leading us are taken from the midst of us. And they represent the best of us. Until we accept that narrative, we will keep moving in this circle. Because there's this way people are thinking. I was sharing with Chuks yesterday and I said to him, when Soren Kierkegaard was looking at the concept of looking into the mirror, and he said many people go to inspect mirror, they don't actually go to look themselves in the mirror. Now, when you go to inspect mirror, you are saying, oh, this mirror is beautiful. Oh, this mirror is not beautiful. This mirror is not well positioned. But you are not wanting to see your face in the mirror. But when you go to look into the mirror, you are looking at where the pimple are in your face, where the things have not touched. Then, of course, you can rearrange your face. So, but here, we have the approach of going to inspect mirror. And that's why you see majority of what our analysis center on is people who are what this person has not done well. What this person has not done well. If this man was not our president, we would have been better off. But we don't understand or realize the contribution that we individually make to destroy the system. So once we can take that approach to look at ourselves in the face and tell ourselves honest truths and say it's not about people, it's not about institutions, it's not about more laws. What is important right now is that people who obey simple law. So if government make a road facility, people should not go and be pulling in the middle of the road and increasing the cost of cleaning for government. People should know how to dispose their waste so that you don't burden the government with the challenge of coming to sweep the streets. Now, if all of us imbibe these little virtues, first, let's even see a clean society. And then we can be talking about clean road. We have seen places where government build barricades on the road and some people go in the night to go and remove the barricade. That's not government. In this Lagos, I see every day people who bypasses pedestrian bridge to cross road, and they are crossing express on foot. These are the things that are destroying the society. So it's not about what one man is doing or not doing at the seat of power. It's what all of us are collectively doing that is actually responsible for the state that we are. And once we can champion that narrative, so that people know that open defecation is a crime against humanity. People know that waste disposal is part of our responsibility in creation to ensure that our environment is catered for, that we replenish it, that we nurture it, that's why God created us. We will still be having this cycle. So I'm hopeful that with SOUQ News, many will come on board, and then we can really spread this good news around, and then we see a society that is truly transformed.
Thank you so much, Delsa Samanze, Director, Research Policy and Development, African Development Studies Center, and in-house analyst here at SOUQ News, for those wonderful points that we raised on the show today.
Thank you so very much, Blessing.
Yes, we've seen that the growth that Africa is experiencing is good, but there can be more to fast-track economic development and sustainability in Africa. It takes a collective action to make it happen. It's not just one person. Everybody has a role to play in this. Let's do our part to ensure the change that we wish for. I am Blessing Age. Thank you for being a part of the show today. It continues tomorrow. That will be 8 a.m. West African time. There are wonderful shows for your viewing delight here on SOUQ News. One of them is Market Insider, comes up at 11. There will be sports at noon with Chooks, John Rogers, and Juve Fere. And of course, at 4 p.m., there will be SOUQ Pulse. Do stay your day with SOUQ News. I'm Blessing AJ. Bye.
Yes, it is often said that life is in phases and men are in sizes. Given the economic reality in Africa, it's important that you live your size part time. Don't forget, Early Exchange returns tomorrow, and Early Exchange will always get bigger and better. I am Femi Ayodele. Enjoy your holiday.